186. The True Bride. Once upon a time, there was a girl who was young and beautiful, but her mother had died early in her life, and her stepmother caused her nothing but heartache. Whenever she was given a task, no matter how difficult, she diligently set to work and did everything within her power. Yet her efforts failed to soften the heart of the wicked woman. She was always dissatisfied. It was never enough. The harder she worked, the heavier the burdens placed upon her, and the stepmother had no other thought than to burden her more and make her life even more miserable. One day she said to her, "Here are 12 pounds of feathers which you must pick, and if you are not finished by this evening, you can expect a good beating. Do you think you can idle away the whole day?" The poor girl sat down to the task, but tears streamed down her cheeks, knowing it was impossible to finish in a single day. Each time she had a little pile of feathers before her and sighed or clasped her hands in anguish, they scattered away, and she had to pick them up again, starting anew. At one point, she rested her elbows on the table, buried her face in her hands, and cried, "Is there no one on God's earth who will have pity on me?" Then she heard a gentle voice saying, "Be comforted, my child. I have come to help you." The girl looked up, and there was an old woman beside her. She kindly took the girl's hand and said, "Tell me what troubles you." Moved by her kindness, the girl told her about her miserable life, how one burden after another was placed upon her, and how she could never finish the tasks given to her. "If I don't finish these feathers by tonight, my stepmother will beat me. She has threatened as much, and I know she keeps her word." Tears flowed again, but the kind old woman said, "Do not worry, my child. Rest a while, and I will take care of your work." The girl lay down on her bed and soon fell asleep. The old woman sat at the table with the feathers. Oh, how they flew off the quills, which she hardly touched with her withered hands. Soon the 12 pounds were finished. When the girl woke up, great snow-white heaps were piled up, and everything in the room was neatly tidied, but the old woman had vanished. The girl thanked God and sat quietly until evening came. When the stepmother entered and marveled at the completed work, she said, "Look, you clumsy creature, see what can be achieved with diligence. Couldn't you have undertaken something else? Yet here you sit with your hands folded." As she left, she said, "This creature is worth more than her salt. I must give her harder work." The next morning, she called the girl and said, "Here is a spoon for you. With it, you must empty the large pond next to the garden. If it's not done by night, you know what will happen." The girl took the spoon and saw that it was full of holes, but even if it hadn't been, she could never have emptied the pond with it. She started the task, kneeling by the water, tears falling into it, and began to empty it. But once again, the good old woman appeared, and when she learned why the girl was upset, she said, "Cheer up, my child. Go into the thicket, lie down, and sleep. I will take care of your work." As soon as the old woman was alone, she barely touched the pond, and vapor rose high from the water, mingling with the clouds. Gradually the pond emptied, and when the maiden woke before sunset and returned, she saw nothing but the fish struggling in the mud. She went to her stepmother and showed her the work was done. "It should have been done long before this," she said, growing pale with anger, but she planned something new. On the third morning, she said to the girl, "You must build me a castle on the plain there, and it must be ready by evening." The maiden was dismayed and said, "How can I complete such a great task?" "I will tolerate no opposition," screamed the stepmother. "If you can empty a pond with a spoonful of holes, you can also build a castle. I will take possession of it today, and if anything is lacking, even the smallest thing in the kitchen or cellar, you know what awaits you." She drove the girl out, and when she entered the valley, the rocks were there, piled one on top of the other, and all her strength could not even move the smallest of them. She sat down and wept, still hoping the old woman would help her. It wasn't long before the old woman came. She comforted her and said, "Lie down in the shade and rest. I will soon build the castle for you. If you wish, you can live in it yourself." When the maiden had left, the old woman touched the gray rocks. They began to rise and immediately moved together as if giants had built the walls. Upon them, the building arose, and it seemed as if countless hands were invisibly at work, placing one stone upon another. A dull, heavy noise came from the ground. Pillars arose by themselves and stood in order next to each other. Tiles arranged themselves on the roof, and by noon, the great weathercock was already turning on the summit of the tower, like a golden figure of the Virgin with fluttering garments. The inside of the castle was finished as evening approached. How the old woman managed it, I do not know, but the walls of the rooms were hung with silk and velvet, embroidered chairs were there, and richly ornamented armchairs stood by marble tables. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, mirroring themselves in the smooth floor. Green parrots were in gilt cages, along with strange birds singing beautifully, and on all sides was as much magnificence as if a king were about to live there. The sun was just setting when the girl awoke, and the brightness of 1,000 lights flashed in her face. She hurried to the castle and entered through the open door. The steps were covered with red cloth, and the golden balustrade was adorned with flowering trees. When she saw the splendor of the rooms, she stood as if turned to stone. Who knows how long she might have stood if she had not remembered her stepmother? Alas, she said to herself, if only she could be satisfied now and stop making my life miserable. The girl went and told her that the castle was ready. I will move into it at once, she said and rose from her seat. When they entered the castle, she had to shield her eyes from the dazzling brightness of everything. You see, she said to the girl, how easy it has been for you to do this. I should have given you something harder. She went through all the rooms, examining every corner to see if anything was missing or defective, but she found nothing. Now let's go down below, she said, looking at the girl with malicious eyes. The kitchen and the cellar still need to be checked, and if you have forgotten anything, you will not escape punishment. But the fire was burning in the hearth, meat was cooking in the pans, the tongues and shovel leaned against the wall, and shiny brass utensils were arranged in sight. Nothing was missing, not even a coal box and a water pail. Which way to the cellar? She cried. If it is not abundantly stocked, you will regret it. She herself lifted the trapdoor and descended, but she had hardly taken 2 steps before the heavy trapdoor, which was only laid back, fell. But the good old woman appeared again, and when she learned the cause of his sorrow, she said, Be comforted, my child. Go into the thicket and lie down to sleep. I will take care of your work. When the old woman was alone, she merely touched the pond. Like a mist, the water rose high and mingled with the clouds. Gradually the pond emptied, and when the maiden awoke before sunset and approached, she saw only the fish struggling in the mud. She went to the stepmother and informed her that the task was completed. You should have been finished long ago, she said, growing pale with anger, but she devised something new. On the 3rd morning, she said to the girl, Over there in the plain, you must build me a beautiful castle, and it must be finished by evening. The girl was frightened and said, How can I accomplish such a great task? I will tolerate no opposition, screamed the stepmother. If you can empty a pond with a spoon full of holes, you can also build a castle. I will move in today, and if anything is missing, even the smallest thing in the kitchen or cellar, you know what awaits you. She drove the girl away, and when she came to the valley, the rocks were piled up one on top of another. With all her strength, she couldn't even move the smallest one. She sat down and cried, still hoping for the help of the good old woman. The old woman did not keep her waiting long, came and comforted her. Just lay down there in the shade and sleep. I will build the castle for you. If it pleases you, you can live in it yourself. When the girl had left, the old woman touched the gray rocks. Immediately, they stirred, moved together, and stood there as if giants had built the wall. The building rose on them, and it seemed as if countless invisible hands were working, laying one stone upon another. The ground rumbled, great columns rose by themselves and stood in order next to each other. Tiles arranged themselves on the roof, and by noon, the large weather vane was already turning like a golden maiden with fluttering garments on the tower's peak. The interior of the castle was completed by evening. How the old woman started it, I do not know, but the walls of the rooms were covered with silk and velvet. Brightly embroidered chairs were there, and ornate armchairs stood at marble tables. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting in the smooth floor. Green parrots sat in gilt cages, along with strange birds singing beautifully. Everywhere was splendor as if a king were to move in. The sun was just setting when the girl awoke, and the brilliance of 1,000 lights shone in her face. She hurried to the castle and stepped through the open gate. The stairs were covered with red cloth, and the golden balustrade adorned with flowering trees. Seeing the splendor of the rooms, she stood frozen. Who knows how long she might have stood there if the thought of her stepmother hadn't come to her? Alas, she said to herself, if only she could be satisfied now and stop making my life miserable. But the girl went and informed her that the castle was finished. I will move in immediately, she said, rising from her seat. When she entered the castle, she had to shield her eyes from the glare. See, she said to the girl, how easy it has become for you. I should have given you something more difficult. She went through all the rooms and checked every corner to see if anything was missing or inadequate, but she found nothing amiss. Now let's go downstairs, she said, casting malicious glances at the girl. The kitchen and cellar still need to be inspected, and if you have forgotten anything, you shall not escape your punishment. But the fire was burning on the hearth. The pots were cooking, the axe and shovel were leaning against the wall, and the brass utensils were arranged. Nothing was missing, not even the coal box and water buckets. Where is the entrance to the cellar? She cried. If it is not abundantly filled with wine barrels, you will suffer for it. She lifted the trapdoor herself and descended the stairs, but scarcely had she taken 2 steps when the heavy trapdoor, which was only resting, fell down. The girl heard a scream, quickly lifted the door to help her, but she had fallen down and found her lifeless on the ground. Now the magnificent castle belonged entirely to the girl. At first, she could hardly believe her luck. Beautiful clothes hung in the wardrobes, chests were filled with gold and silver, or with pearls and gemstones, and there was no wish she could not fulfill. Soon, the fame of the girl's beauty and wealth spread throughout the world. Suitors came every day, but none of them pleased her. Finally, the son of a king arrived, who touched her heart, and she became engaged to him. In the castle garden stood a green lime tree, where they sat together one day in confidence. He said to her, I will go home now and obtain my father's consent for our marriage. I beg you, wait for me here under this lime tree. I will be back in a few hours. The girl kissed him on the left cheek and said, Stay true to me and let no other woman kiss you on this cheek. I will wait here under the lime tree until you return. The girl remained sitting under the lime tree until the sun set, but he did not return. She sat there for 3 days from morning till evening, waiting for him, but in vain. When he still had not returned on the 4th day, she said, Surely some misfortune has befallen him. I will go out and search for him, and not return until I have found him. She packed 3 of her finest dresses, one embroidered with shining stars, the second with silver moons, and the third with golden suns. She tied a handful of gemstones in her scarf and set out. She asked everywhere for her bridegroom, but no one had seen him, no one knew of him. Far and wide she wandered through the world, but she did not find him. Finally, she hired herself out to a farmer as a shepherdess and buried her dresses and gemstones under a stone. Now she lived as a shepherdess, tended her flock, was sad, and full of longing for her beloved. She had a calf that she trained, fed it by hand, and when she said, Calf, calf, kneel down, do not forget your shepherdess, as the king's son forgot the bride who sat under the green lime tree. The calf would kneel down, and she would stroke it. After living a few years in loneliness and sorrow, rumors spread throughout the land that the king's daughter was going to celebrate her wedding. The road to the town passed by the village where the girl lived, and it so happened that as she was driving her herd one day, the bridegroom passed by. He sat proudly on his horse and did not look at her, but when she looked at him, she recognized her beloved. It was as if a sharp knife pierced her heart. Ah, she said, I thought he would remain faithful to me, but he has forgotten me. The next day he came back the same way. When he was near her, she spoke to the calf. Calf, calf, kneel down, do not forget your shepherdess, as the king's son forgot the bride who sat under the green lime tree. When he heard the voice, he looked down and stopped his horse. He looked at the shepherdess's face, then covered his eyes as if trying to remember something, but quickly rode on and soon disappeared. Ah, she said, he no longer knows me. and her sorrow grew deeper. Soon after, a great feast was to be held for 3 days at the king's court, and the whole land was invited. Now I will try the last resort, thought the girl, and when evening came, she went to the stone where she had buried her treasures. She took out the dress with the golden suns, put it on, and adorned herself with the gemstones. She loosened her hair, which she had hidden under a cloth, and it fell in long locks around her. Thus she went to the town and went unnoticed in the darkness. When she entered the brightly lit hall, everyone stepped back in amazement, but no one knew who she was. The king's son approached her, but he did not recognize her. He led her to dance and was so delighted by her beauty that he forgot about the other bride. When the feast was over, she disappeared into the crowd and hurried back to the village before dawn, where she put on her shepherdess dress again. The next evening, she took out the dress with the silver moons and put a crescent of gemstones in her hair. When she appeared at the feast, all eyes turned to her. But the king's son hurried toward her, and filled with love, he danced with her alone and did not look at any other. Before she left, she had to promise him to come back for the last evening. When she appeared for the third time, she wore the starry dress that sparkled with every step she took, and her hairband and belt were adorned with star-shaped gemstones. The king's son had been waiting for her for a long time and pressed toward her. "Tell me who you are," he said. "It feels as if I have known you for a long time." "Do you not know," she replied, "what I did when you parted from me?" Then she approached him and kissed him on the left cheek. In that moment, scales fell from his eyes, and he recognized the true bride. "Come," he said to her, "this place is no longer for me." He reached out his hand and led her down to the carriage. As if driven by the wind, the horses rushed to the Wonder Castle. The illuminated windows gleamed from afar. As they passed the lime tree, countless fireflies swarmed around it, shaking its branches and sending their scents down. Flowers bloomed on the stairs, the foreign birds sang from the room. But in the hall, the entire court was assembled, and the priest waited to marry the groom to the true bride. The Hare and the Hedgehog, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. This story, my dear young folks, seems false, but it really is true, for my grandfather, from whom I have it, always used to say complacently when relating it, "It must be true, my son, or else no one could tell it to you." The story is as follows. One Sunday morning around harvest time, just as the buckwheat was blooming, the sun shone brightly in the sky, the east wind blew warmly over the stubble fields, larks sang in the air, bees buzzed among the buckwheat. People went to church in their Sunday best, and all creatures were happy, including the hedgehog. The hedgehog, however, stood by his door with his arms akimbo, enjoying the morning breezes and softly trilling a little song to himself. No better or worse than the songs hedgehogs sing on a blessed Sunday morning. While singing half aloud, it occurred to him that while his wife washed and dried the children, he might as well take a walk into the field to check on his turnips. The turnips were close to his house, and he and his family were accustomed to eating them, so he considered them his own. No sooner said than done. The hedgehog shut the house door behind him and headed for the field. He hadn't gone far from home and was just turning around the sloe bush outside the field to go up to the turnip field when he spotted the hare, who was out for the same reason, to inspect his cabbages. When the hedgehog saw the hare, he bid him a friendly good morning. The hare, in his own way a distinguished gentleman and terribly haughty, did not return the hedgehog's greeting. Instead, he said in a very contemptuous manner, "How come you're running around here in the field so early in the morning?" "I am taking a walk," said the hedgehog. "A walk," said the hare with a smile. "It seems to me you could use your legs for a better purpose." This answer made the hedgehog furious, as he could bear anything but an attack on his legs, which were naturally crooked. So the hedgehog said to the hare, "You seem to think you can do more with your legs than I can with mine." "That's exactly what I think," said the hare. "Let's put it to the test," said the hedgehog. "I wager that if we race, I will outstrip you." "That's ridiculous. You with your short legs," said the hare. "But if you insist on such a wild idea, what shall we wager?" "A golden louis d'or and a bottle of brandy," said the hedgehog. "Done," said the hare. Shake hands on it and let's get started." "Nay," said the hedgehog, "there's no rush. I'm still fasting. I'll go home first and have a little breakfast. I'll be back at this place in half an hour." With that, the hedgehog departed, and the hare was satisfied with this arrangement. On his way, the hedgehog thought to himself, "The hare relies on his long legs, but I will find a way to outwit him. He may be a great man, but he is a very foolish fellow, and he shall pay for what he has said." So when the hedgehog reached home, he said to his wife, "Wife, dress yourself quickly. You must come to the field with me." "What is going on then?" said his wife. "I have made a wager with the hare for a gold louis d'or and a bottle of brandy. I am to run a race with him, and thou must be present." "Good heavens, husband," the wife cried. "Art thou not right in thy mind? Hast thou completely lost thy wits? What can make thee want to run a race with the hare?" "Hold thy tongue, woman," said the hedgehog. "That is my affair. Don't begin to discuss things which are matters for men. Be off, dress thyself, and come with me." What could the hedgehog's wife do? She was forced to obey him, whether she liked it or not. So when they had set out on their way together, the hedgehog said to his wife, "Now pay attention to what I'm going to say. Look you, I will make the long field our race course. The hare shall run in one furrow and I in another, and we will begin to run from the top. Now all that thou hast to do is to place thyself here below in the furrow, and when the hare arrives at the end of the furrow on the other side of thee, thou must cry out to him, 'I am here already.'" Then they reached the field, and the hedgehog showed his wife her place, and then walked up the field. When he reached the top, the hare was already there. "Shall we start?" said the hare. "Certainly," said the hedgehog, then both at once. So saying, each placed himself in his own furrow. The hare counted once, twice, thrice, and away, and went off like a whirlwind down the field. The hedgehog, however, only ran about 3 paces, and then he stooped down in the furrow, and stayed quietly where he was. When the hare therefore arrived in full career at the lower end of the field, the hedgehog's wife met him with the cry, "I am here already." The hare was shocked and wondered not a little. He thought no other than that it was the hedgehog himself who was calling to him. For the hedgehog's wife looked just like her husband. The hare, however, thought to himself, "That has not been done fairly," and cried, "It must be run again. Let us have it again." And once more he went off like the wind in a storm, so that he seemed to fly. But the hedgehog's wife stayed quietly in her place. So when the hare reached the top of the field, the hedgehog himself cried out to him, "I am here already." The hare, however, quite beside himself with anger, cried, "It must be run again. We must have it again." "All right," answered the hedgehog. "For my part, we'll run as often as you choose." So the hare ran 73 times more, and the hedgehog always held out against him, and every time the hare reached either the top or the bottom, either the hedgehog or his wife said, "I am here already." At the 74th time, however, the hare could no longer reach the end. In the middle of the field he fell to the ground, deep blood streamed out of his mouth, and he lay dead on the spot. But the hedgehog took the louis d'or which he had won and the bottle of brandy, called his wife out of the furrow, and both went home together in great delight. And if they are not dead, they are living there still. This is how it happened that the hedgehog made the hare run races with him on the Buxtehude Heath till he died. And since that time, no hare has ever had any fancy for running races with a Buxtehude hedgehog. The moral of this story, however, is firstly that no one, however great he may be, should permit himself to jest anyone beneath him, even if he be only a hedgehog. And secondly, it teaches that when a man marries, he should take a wife in his own position, who looks just as he himself looks. So whosoever is a hedgehog, let him see to it that his wife is a hedgehog also, and so forth. Certainly. Here's the English translation based on the text you provided. 188. Spindle, shuttle, and needle. There was once a girl whose father and mother died when she was still a little child. At the end of the village, there lived a godmother in a small house all alone, who supported herself by spinning, weaving, and sewing. The old woman took the forsaken child in, kept her to her work, and educated her in all piety. When the girl was 15 years old, the old woman fell ill, called the child to her bedside, and said, "Dear daughter, I feel that my end is approaching. I leave you the little house in which you are protected from wind and weather, along with the spindle, shuttle, and needle with which you can earn your bread." She also laid her hands on its head, blessed it, and said, "Just keep God in your heart, then all will go well." Then she closed her eyes, and when she was buried in the earth, the girl went bitterly weeping behind the coffin and paid her the last honor. Now the girl lived alone in the little house, was diligent, spun, wove, and sewed, and the blessing of the good old woman rested on all that she did. It was as if the flax in the chamber increased by itself, and whenever she had woven a piece of cloth or a carpet, or had sewn a shirt, a buyer immediately appeared who paid her generously so that she felt no need and could share something with others. At this time, the king's son traveled through the country and wanted to find a bride. He should not choose a poor one and did not want a rich one. So he said, "She shall be my wife, who is both the poorest and the richest." When he came to the village where the girl lived, he asked, as he did everywhere, who was the richest and who was the poorest in the place. They named the richest first. The poorest, they said, was the girl who lived in the small house at the very end. The rich girl sat in front of her door in full splendor, and when the king's son approached, she got up, went to meet him, and bowed low before him. He looked at her, said nothing, and rode on. When he came to the house of the poor girl, she was not standing at the door, but sitting in her little room. He stopped his horse and saw through the window, on which the bright sun was shining, the girl sitting at her spinning wheel, spinning diligently. She looked up, and when she noticed that the king's son was looking in, she blushed all over, lowered her eyes, and continued spinning. Whether the thread was even this time, I do not know, but she spun until the king's son had ridden away again. Then she went to the window, opened it, and said, "It is so hot in the room." But she watched him as long as she could distinguish the white feathers in his hat. The girl sat down again in her room to work and continued spinning. Then a saying came to her mind that the old woman had sometimes said when she was sitting at her work, and she sang to herself, "Spindle, spindle, go forth, bring the suitor to my house." What happened? The spindle sprang instantly from her hand and out the door, and as she stood up in astonishment and looked after it, she saw it dancing merrily into the field, drawing a shining golden thread behind it. Before long, it had disappeared from her sight. Since the girl no longer had a spindle, she took the weaver's shuttle in her hand, sat down at the loom, and began to weave. Meanwhile, the spindle continued to dance onwards, and just as the thread came to an end, it reached the king's son. "What do I see?" he cried. "Does the spindle want to show me the way?" He turned his horse around and rode back along the golden thread. Meanwhile, the girl sat at her work and sang, "Shuttle, shuttle, weave finely, bring the suitor to me." Immediately, the shuttle sprang from her hand and out the door. Before the threshold, it began to weave a carpet, more beautiful than any ever seen before. Roses and lilies bloomed on both sides, and in the middle, on a golden ground, green vines ascended, amidst which hares and rabbits bounded. Stags and deer stretched their heads between them, and brightly colored birds sat in the branches above. They lacked only the gift of song. The shuttle leaped back and forth, and it seemed as if everything grew of its own accord. As the shuttle had run off, the girl sat down to sew. She held the needle in her hand and sang, "Needle, needle, sharp and fine, make the house ready for the suitor." Then the needle leapt from her fingers and flew about the room as quick as lightning. It was as if invisible spirits were working. Tables and benches were covered with green cloth in an instant. Chairs with velvet and silk curtains hung at the windows. Hardly had the needle put in the last stitch when the maiden saw through the window the white feathers from the hat of the king's son, whom the spindle had brought there by the golden thread. He dismounted, stepped over the carpet into the house, and when he entered the room, there stood the maiden in her poor clothes, but she glowed within them like a rose in the bush. "You are the poorest and also the richest," he said to her. "Come with me, you shall be my bride." She did not speak, but she gave him her hand. Then he gave her a kiss, led her forth, lifted her onto his horse, and brought her to the royal castle, where the wedding was celebrated with great joy. The spindle, shuttle, and needle were stored in the treasure chamber and held in great honor. 189. The Farmer and the Devil. Once upon a time, there was a clever and sly little farmer whose tricks were well known. But the best story is how he once outwitted and made a fool of the devil. One day, the farmer had been working his field and was preparing to return home as twilight had already set in. There, in the middle of his field, he saw a heap of glowing coals, and to his astonishment, sitting atop the embers was a little black devil. "You must be sitting on a treasure?" said the farmer. "Indeed," replied the devil, "on a treasure containing more gold and silver than you've seen in your lifetime." "The treasure lies in my field and belongs to me," said the farmer. "It is yours," answered the devil, "if for 2 years you give me half of what your field produces. I have enough money, but I desire the fruits of the earth." The farmer agreed to the deal. "To prevent any dispute during the division," he said, "what is above the ground shall be yours, and what is below shall be mine." The devil agreed, but the cunning farmer had planted turnips. When harvest time came, the devil appeared to claim his crop, but found nothing but yellow withered leaves, while the farmer, quite pleased, dug up his turnips. "You had the advantage once," said the devil, "but next time that won't work. Yours shall be what grows above ground, and mine what is below." "That's fine with me," replied the farmer. But when planting time came, the farmer did not sow turnips again, but wheat. When the crop ripened, the farmer went to the field and cut the tall stalks down to the ground. When the devil arrived, he found nothing but stubble and angrily descended into a rocky gorge. "That's how you outwit the foxes," said the farmer, and went to claim the treasure. 190. The Crumbs on the Table. Once upon a time, the rooster said to his little chickens, "Come quickly into the parlor and gather breadcrumbs together on the table. Our lady has gone out to pay a visit." But the little chickens said, "No, no, we won't come. If the lady catches us, she'll beat us." The rooster said, "She knows nothing about it. Just come. After all, she never gives us anything good." The little chickens again said, "No, no, it's over and done with. We won't go up." However, the rooster did not let them have any peace until they finally went up onto the table and gathered breadcrumbs together with all their might. Just then, the lady came in and grabbed a stick quickly and beat them and treated them very harshly. And when they were outside the house, the little chickens said to the rooster, "Did you see? Did you see?" Then the rooster laughed and simply said, "Didn't you know?" So they had to just go away.